Welcome to a new episode of Opening Bid. I'm Yahoo Finance Executive Editor Brian Sozzi. Like I always say, this is the podcast that will make you a better investor and, dare I say, a smarter leader. I really want to lean into that smarter leader here for this episode. Let's bring in Novartis CEO Vas Narasimhan. Vas, good to see you. It has been a while. Welcome back to Yahoo Finance. Welcome to Opening Bid. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. Great to be with you today.
So before we even get into, there's no shortage of developments in the healthcare space, that is for sure. But before we even, get into that, let's talk a little bit about what you've been working on. You've been at Novartis, since 2018? It's a new year. I'm sure you took stock on last year. How is Novartis different entering 2025 compared to when you first started?
Yeah, when you look back in 2018, when I started in the role, we were a relatively diversified healthcare conglomerate. We were in generics, we were in eye care, we were in consumer health. And I think we were one of the early movers in our sector to really transform our company into a pure play medicines company. We did over $130 billion in deals, exited businesses with some very large spins that were very shareholder friendly, Sandoz and Alcon. We transformed the company with a very large restructuring program to really simplify down. And then really last year was the first year that Novartis was a pure play company, really in its 200-year history. We've always had some element of being a conglomerate. And you saw us have an outstanding financial year. We raised guidance 3 consecutive times, double-digit sales growth, planning for double-digit core operating growth. So really now putting us in the right trajectory. Now looking ahead, as always in the pharmaceutical industry, it's all about the mid to long-term growth, and do you have the pipeline to keep growing? So we've guided to very robust growth through the remainder of this decade, but the big question for our company is, what's the next wave of innovations that will power our growth in 2030 and beyond?
I imagine, I want to get into a lot of those bets you're making and where you see that growth, but I imagine you've had to unwind a lot of, I guess, legacy thinking. For many years, I thought Novartis, I thought conglomerate, but to your point, to me, I read your annual report, it's a different company. Talk to us how, from a leadership perspective, you went about doing some of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about it, we had always believed that being a conglomerate protected us from the ups and downs of pharmaceutical innovation. As you know, very high risk innovation, only 1 in 10 medicines that we take into the clinic ultimately is successful. And so that was kind of the ethos in the organization. But when we really looked at the facts and we looked at the data, most of where the value creation that Novartis really made since really forming as Novartis as it's currently constituted in 1996 came from pharmaceutical drug discovery and research. And all of these other businesses with lower returns on capital, lower overall, higher capital intensity, lower overall return profiles, we're actually dragging down the company. And so what we found, and when we looked at the data, that the right thing to do was to really split this up. Now, it was a very hard road. These were really integrated businesses. Alcon took 3 years to spin. Sandoz took 2 to 3 years to spin. We had to disentangle these companies. But what you're left with is a much more focused organization. And it's really interesting. Right now, our sales and free cash flow is going to be, we expect at least, to be higher than what we had when we had all of these businesses. So we've more than made up for 3 major spins by becoming a pure play.
How do you go about changing a company's culture? It's an older company. I've known Novartis for many decades, so there's a lot of people. Is it hard to change culture?
Very hard, but I think important. When I started in the role, we sort of took stock and said, historically, this has been a very top-down oriented organization, command and control, suits and ties. We were, really, I think, more of an old school company. And what we set out to do was to really send a completely new message to the organization. So we said we wanted a culture that's inspired by a sense of purpose, curious about the internal and the external world, and unbossed, meaning that people were really empowered to do their work once they understood what the clear expectations were. The first few years were bumpy trying to make that happen. I think people were confused by the terminology. I think when you want to make a culture change happen, you need to really, rattle the status quo. The word unboss created confusion, created a lot of debate, created people feeling like there should be anarchy, that people should be able to do whatever they want. So we had a lot of good debates, but I kind of realized that if you want to grow a culture, you got to create the great debate. You got to really have people debate what kind of culture do they want in the organization. And I think over time we've gotten to a place now where people understand what we mean by unboss. People understand we expect people to be held accountable, but also be empowered. And I think that's helping drive the performance. But it's an ongoing journey. I mean, we operate in over 100 countries. We're 80,000 people. So there is one Novartis culture, but then there's also lots of microcultures around the world.
Uh, all CEO jobs are tough, and it is lonely, and these are lonely gigs. But I look at what you do and a lot of what your competitors do in healthcare. These are really, really hard jobs. And not only given the diseases you're trying to fight, but you're making big bets on products that may not even come to fruition. What makes you tick, Vas? I mean, how did you get to where you are today?
You know what? I mean, that's a big question. I think certainly you need to have I think a pretty relentless passion for the mission of an organization to really want to fight every single day when you know that most of the time you're going to fail. I mean, my background is as a physician scientist. I started out working in the world of public health on areas like HIV/AIDS, TB, and malaria. Ended up at Novartis, mostly working in R&D. So I cut my teeth in R&D. I've seen many, many, many projects fail, but then there are all those moments when I like to think of it a miracle that fits in the palm of your hand. A drug actually works, and you have a big impact on patients, and that has such a huge impact on humanity because these drugs last for decades. They impact generations. So I grew up in that world of failure and coming back and doing it again and doing it again. And so in the end, I mean, I always think about how do you inspire a healthier world? I mean, that's my core goal. That's why I got into medicine. That's why I do this work. But it is a tough business. I mean, we have to regenerate pretty much all of our sales every 15 to 20 years. So for Novartis, we have to regenerate over $50 billion in sales on an ongoing basis. It's part of the reason why our sector has a discount on its multiple relative to, let's say, the medical device sector, which doesn't have to regenerate everything. So it trades at 23 to 25x. We trade at 14 to 17x because there's this discount because we have this patent expiries. But at the same time, we work on the most cutting edge science there is in the world. And I think it's pretty amazing that we can work on RNA therapeutics or gene therapy or now AI with Google DeepMind and isomorphic labs. So, there's always more exciting things to work on and to keep generating these medicines.
How have you dealt with failure?
You have a lot of failure in these roles, and I think that's one of the things leaders probably need to talk about more openly with their organizations. I think it's always a huge punch in the gut, of course, when you have a big setback. And we had some tough years. I mean, we had some years where, especially during the pandemic, we were not one of the companies that I think really had a pandemic boom. In fact, we had really, really tough years where share price was depressed. Investors were understandably quite upset with the performance. But I always tried to think about how could you use failure as a way to get better. I always found the only times I got better or our organization got better is when we could transform setbacks into opportunities. And that's tough. It doesn't usually happen in the moment. But if you can keep reframing things as to how can I take this as an opportunity for growth, either growing myself, growing my team, growing the company, then you can turn failure into a real engine for improvement. And I think that's what great leaders have to do. You've got to take the failures, learn from them, and then get better. And then the organization will follow.
Well, so I always ask a lot of executives, what's your opportunity for the next 12 months? But I don't even think that's the right question for a company like Novartis. What are some of the big bets you're making for the next 5 to 10 years? And what do investors need to know about them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the right question because for us, the next 5 years is relatively set based on the portfolio we have and the medicines that are either approved or soon to be approved. We make a couple of big bets. Early on in my tenure as CEO, I really believed that medicine was going to move beyond the world of pills and so-called biologic injections into what I like to call advanced technology platforms, new areas of science and medicine. And we've made a number of bets, one of the first movers in many of these areas. So the key ones we really bet on big. One is an area called radioligand therapy. This is an area where we microdose radiation to cancers in a very targeted way. So we can basically guide radiation directly to the cancer and kill the tumor without having to radiate the whole body. Already 2 drugs approved, one called Lutathera, one called Pluvicto. And our goal is to build this out across a range of solid tumors. It's pretty hard stuff. We have to make the drug and deliver it to the patient within 5 days. We have to be able to handle nuclear material. But our bet is post 2030, this could be a $30 billion plus market. Another area of high interest for us is cell and gene therapies. I mean, this was an area that was really hot a few years ago, has really gone through the valley of kind of despair where there were a lot of failures, and now I think is having a renaissance. In cell therapy, the big renaissance is that you can use these therapies to reset people's immune systems. And that could allow us to enable us to treat a whole range of immunological diseases. So our company and others are racing to try to figure this out. In gene therapies, we already know we can transform the lives of children with a rare disease called spinal muscular atrophy, and now we want to use gene therapies to address even more diseases in the future. So that's another big bet. And then the third is the whole world of RNA therapeutics. People know a lot about mRNA vaccines, but alongside that came up a whole new space around RNA therapeutics, which is pretty amazing. And basically, you can take medicines that used to be having to be given daily and give them once every 6 months, maybe even once a year. So could you vaccinate almost, or could you treat cholesterol or hypertension with an injection once a year? And that's what we're trying to get to by the 2030s. So I think there's a lot of exciting stuff. There are things we're not as big on, like gene editing and other things. But I think the real question for the 2030s and beyond is who is best positioned to take advantage of these new technology areas? And that's what we're trying to be.
Vas, hang with us. We're going to go off for a quick break. We'll be right back on Opening Bid. Really having a fascinating chat here, and welcome back to Opening Bid. Having a fascinating chat here with Novartis CEO Vas Narasimhan on all things the future of healthcare. I'm listening to the products, I guess I call them products, or drugs or therapies that you're working on. I can't help but to think, Vas, AI is going to have a really big impact on how drugs are developed, how the processes go. I mean, take me inside how you're thinking about it.
Look, we think AI could have a big impact in R&D in our sector. You won't see it in the next 5 years, but I do think you'll see it in the 5 to 10 years. Our big bets are really partnering with some of the leaders in this space. One of them being Isomorphic Labs, whose CEO Demis Hassabis won the Nobel Prize. We're one of their 2 core partners. What we do there is try to use AI to identify targets for drugs and then better design the next wave of drugs for those targets and then move them rapidly into the clinic. Isomorphic Labs and DeepMind really shocked the world in 2020 when they were able to model the structure of pretty much any protein that we know in the human body. So that enables them to really come up with novel approaches to find new drugs. And that could really speed up both the time it takes to find a new drug candidate, but hopefully increase the probability of success as well. We work with Palantir. We've got a large data lake now across all of our clinical trials that we've built over many years, now 5 years of partnership with Palantir, and that's really powering our ability to mine our data, hopefully to find new insights. Other partnerships as well, all focused, I would say, in the preclinical and early development space. The big win for our sector is, can you get from having 1 in 10 medicines succeed that enter into humans to maybe 3 in 10? Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but that is massive when you operate in the scale that we do. And AI might enable us to do that over time. And that's what we're hoping at least might happen.
Well, as I see so many, and I'm sure you see it too, so much, the pace of innovation in AI, it really is mind-blowing. And I hope I don't seem naive here, but like in our lifetime, is AI the major unlock where it helps cure cancer? I know it's a broad sweeping question, but like, does AI trigger that major moment sometime in our life?
I mean, I'm not there yet. I mean, I think AI right now is limited insofar as if you think about it in the human body, we only understand about 2 to 3% of what's going on in the 30 trillion cells, the genome, the transcriptome, the proteome, the microbiome. And AI is constrained by what we know, right? And that's what it can ingest and then analyze. And so I think it's the real unlock will be continuing to expand our own understanding of what's going on in the body. And then AI can help us integrate that, bring new insights. But I think that's going to be the limitation. And I think AI may not be in itself the unlock. It's going to take, I think, great scientific minds. But I do think AI will accelerate the whole process. I mean, you think about something like a simple example. it used to take us 4 to 6 months to optimize a drug candidate. Now AI can do that in hours. And so that will compound over time and hopefully lead to faster and faster drug discoveries.
One, I know you don't play in the GLP-1 space. What is there an end game to this? I see now every company seemingly selling GLP-1s. I mean, I see the commercials now on TV. Like, where is that program a decade from now?
I think GLP-1s will become a foundational therapy for patients with obesity, along with the various combination therapies. But I think there's so much competition now and so many entrants, along with two very large incumbents. For a company like Novartis, we need to really focus on places where we have the right to win. Some of the technologies I told you about, other therapeutic areas we're working on. And in obesity, our goal is hopefully to discover the next generation of medicines that maybe cause less nausea and less side effects, preserve muscle better, maybe have other benefits in other related conditions. So I think that's where we're much more focused on, rather than being the 8th or the 10th or the 14th GLP-1, GIP-1. I think that ship has sailed. Better to use our capital to find new discoveries. But there's no question that in the 2030s, this will be a broad-based, likely genericized or broadly commoditized space where these medicines will be broadly available.
So if you could find a better solution that keeps muscles intact, I mean, do you see yourself playing in the weight loss drug market in some capacity?
I think if we find those next breakthroughs, absolutely. But we really want to find something differentiated. I think now the space is so crowded in the first generation assets that there's not really a place where you can create a lot of value coming in at this stage.
Healthcare has been in a lot of news. Of course, we have a new administration coming into the White House. Look, we've seen comments from some of these folks in Trump's circle, whether it's RFK, potential Health and Human Services lead, on vaccines. What's your stance on vaccines? And as a physician, Vas, are you concerned that people are in positions of power undermining like confidence in proven medicines, like a polio vaccine?
Brian, I'm a vaccinologist by background, so I'm a huge believer in the power of vaccines. I think other than clean water, vaccines have led to the most important gains in human life expectancy and overall human health in the last century, really since the advent of modern medicine. And it is concerning anytime we undermine confidence in vaccines. Vaccines are extraordinarily well studied, especially in the United States, very rigorously evaluated. And we need to ensure children, get their vaccines and adults get their vaccines as indicated. So I think as a public health establishment, I think broadly the government has to keep reminding the public that vaccines are important. They need to be taken on time. It's incredibly important for people's health and well-being, and confidence in vaccines should not be undermined. I mean, I think around the world, my experiences in places like Africa is people fight for their vaccines. They're desperate to get vaccines because they know how powerful a public health intervention this is. So I'm hopeful that maybe the rhetoric is just rhetoric, and then hopefully we get to a better place where their confidence in the U.S. public health system and the vaccine system is not undermined any further.
Are you concerned that the next 4 years science gets set back? The work that you do and a lot of your competitors gets set back to the point where it hurts the health of people?
No, I'm not so sure it relates to the current, political environment. It's more, I think, a broad concern. I have, and I think, many people have, that science is being undermined in the world of social media. And I think there is a role for real experts, and there is a role for experts who can interpret science and interpret data. It's always imperfect. There's always hypotheses that are being tested. But we do need to hopefully get back to a place where science and scientific expertise is respected. And when you think about regulators like the FDA, I mean, the FDA is the gold standard globally in how rigorously they look at data and look at science, the data we generate to make decisions on medicines. It's really the only regulator in the world that asks us for our raw data and reanalyzes everything we do because of the expertise they have in-house, and ensures that everything that they put into a final drug label or therapeutic label is entirely accurate. So this is really rigorous stuff. And I think we need to get the public to understand that science is important. It's important to trust scientists. And we won't always get it right, but that is the scientific process, and we have to trust that process.
It is wild, Vas, to see the threads on social media. I mean, the polio vaccine. I mean, it saved countless lives. What, it got approved in 1955? I hope I have it right, but it's almost hard to believe.
I mean, we were at least a few years ago on the verge of potentially eliminating polio. Now, of course, it's taken some setbacks, and I certainly think undermining the polio vaccine has been one of the many great success stories in public health, and we certainly cannot undermine this. I mean, going back to a world where polio is present in children's lives would be absolutely devastating.
You mentioned the international component and demand for vaccines. What do you see from overseas, in terms of vaccines and how they're approaching public health nowadays?
Yeah, I think look, I think over the last 50 years, we've seen huge gains in, particularly in developing countries, on infant mortality, maternal mortality. When you look at life expectancy, vaccines, but as well as medicines, are continuing to have a huge role to play. I think the big challenge right now facing healthcare systems around the world is the demographic shift to increasingly aging populations. And as that happens, you have a shift significantly towards non-communicable diseases. That's already happened in Europe. It's happening in Asia, happening in Latin America and Africa. And then the question is how to enable healthcare systems to invest in health, looking at health as an investment that unlocks productivity, reduces, hospitalization costs, et cetera. And that's the transition that we have to really make happen. Otherwise, medicines don't get to the patients that need them. People put off therapies. Many places, cancer or heart disease are diagnosed far too late. And we need to make that investment case much more clearly to countries around the world.
Well, it's the last 2 minutes of the podcast. We always like to open it up for what we call a hot take. Let me ask you this for the last part. I hear everything you're working on. It sounds really potentially impactful today. I hear you've restructured the company. You've come out with some good long-term guidance. Like, why is the stock not reflecting some of these things that you're working on? My question, what are investors missing about Novartis, and why are they wrong?
Well, first I'd say, look, we're number 3 on TSR, actually in the 2-year, I think number 5 on the 1-year. Just the whole sector has had a de-investment. And, I think on Novartis, I think people underestimate our power of our scientists and the power of our pipeline. At a recent investor day, we went through the depth of our pipeline in each one of our therapeutic areas. I think investors are increasingly believing we can reach our 5% sales growth, 40% margin goal over the next 5 years. But I hope what we can show smart investors who invest early in us, that they make the right bet on a company that has such a consistent track record in R&D, that we will continue to grow in the mid-single digits into the 2030s. We will lead in some of these new technology platform areas. And this is a great opportunity because right now that is the real disconnect on the stock. 2030 to 2035, many sell side have us growing minimally or even at 0%. That's frankly ridiculous in my view, given the power of our R&D agenda and the demonstrated success that we've had. So it's a great opportunity, and hopefully investors will start to see that.
This episode really underscores, Vas, why we have always enjoyed talking to you on Yahoo Finance. We're going to leave it there for now. Novartis CEO Vas Narasimhan. Hope to see you at the World Economic Forum. It's coming up. Looking forward to putting those boots on and hitting the snow.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian.
All right. That's it for the latest episode of Opening Bid. Be sure to hit us with those 5 stars on Apple Music and Spotify. Thumbs up on YouTube. We appreciate the love. Drop comments in the comments section. I read them. I answer them because, well, I just enjoy doing this stuff. That's it for the latest episode of Opening Bid.